try to blame it on the previous government because it was a decision they made. Well, they made lots of decisions that have costs going forward. Are we going to just back them all up? Prepay them all? It's a silly notion. You know that. And you know that. And to stand in this House again and tell Nova Scotians that you've kept every commitment you made during the election campaign is not accurate, and you know it. Mr. Speaker, we got an economic panel. I spoke about it in the beginning, and I was hoping to get an opportunity to have an exchange with the Premier on questions, but obviously some of his staff must have pumped him up, must have patted him on the back before he came over, so he could come over to be more eloquent and go on about the stuff instead of answering the questions that people had put before him. You know, we were looking for where was the policy that says, where's the written policy that he quoted in this House many times to pay for his Bar Society fees? Where's the policy that says we pay for the moving of political staff? There isn't one. There's one that says we pay for civil servants. We believe there isn't one that says we pay for political staff. And yet, instead, you go on and, you know, get a chance and you get your cheering crowd behind you and they'll stand up and they'll clap for you at the right time. People in the gallery will be good, but Nova Scotians won't get an answer. And the answers they got right now were misleading. When you said you kept every commitment to the people of this province, because you didn't. And those are the facts. Read your own platform. Those are the facts. Mr. Speaker, it'd be interesting to know, you know, where, when the economic panel was put together, you know, what were the costs of that panel? Were those members paid? Was there a stipend? Were they paid just expenses? You know, what was the arrangement made with the members of the economic panel? I know we have paid Deloitte approximately $100,000. We're paying Dr. Ross as well to go around and get the information that we already know. Health authorities could give that to the Minister of Health now. But it'd be tough to hide behind the health authority. You need someone else in front to hide behind, and that's probably what we're going to get for the Dr. Ross report, is someone else to fall in behind. I've listened to the Premier talk today about trying to improve the economy of the province of Nova Scotia, and the first decision, one of the first decisions his government makes is to cut the CAT service. To cut the ferry service between Nova Scotia and Maine at the international link. I'd say, you know, Mr. Speaker, and I've said in this House, and the Premier's referenced it to many members in this House, has said in the region of southwestern Nova Scotia recognized the CAT ferry service wasn't the appropriate vessel. What they looked for, though, was an extra year to go forward. Instead, what we have now is a spat between the federal and provincial government about who's going to try to take credit to fix it. We have two groups that somehow overlap. No one's allowed to say who sits on them to solve the problem of the job losses in southwestern Nova Scotia. Doesn't sound like governing. Doesn't sound like governing. It sounds like trying to win a political war with their federal counterparts. You get the federal government wanting to lead the show, and you get the province wanting to lead the show, instead of focusing on the people of Yarmouth and southwestern Nova Scotia. And during this discussion, as a person who lives in southwestern Nova Scotia, that ferry service, the cut to that ferry service not only impacts Yarmouth, it impacts the entire southwestern Nova Scotia and the economy of this province. So to have two organizations trying to find the solution just simply doesn't make sense. You know, we talk about cooperation. You know, why is it that two levels of government can't cooperate together with the municipalities to find a solution to this? Because everyone's looking for their own political reward, I guess you would say. They want to be able to say we were the champions of this. Mr. Speaker, I think, quite frankly, that if the work is done and gets done right, everyone will get credit. Both provincial, federal, and municipal governments. They won't ask who led it. They'll congratulate all of those involved to finding the solution. It's why the names that have not been brought forward to the House from men and women who have committed to stepping up, because they want to be part of the solution. They want to help find the problem and how do we rebuild the economy of southwestern Nova Scotia. But instead, what they're finding themselves is in the middle of a spat between the federal and provincial government about which one's going to take the credit or get the credit. You know, we're sitting here today and the Premier's talking about commitments he didn't keep. And yet when we ask him to table the 1% reduction, which was a commitment, across department by department, he's unwilling to do it. You asked the member from Inverness what he was hiding from when he wouldn't table a document. I guess the question could be asked of the Premier, what are you hiding from? Why don't you want to put out in front of the people of the province the cuts you made, the reductions you made? You believed in them. You said during the campaign you were going to do that. It's one commitment that we think you've kept. We think you've kept. We'd like to see it. You know, so I would encourage you to think about that and lay out to the people of the province why that where those cuts were, and if you believed in them and it's important, you can defend them. The Minister of Justice put them out. We thought it would be appropriate for the leader of the government, the Premier of our province, to be able to do that across government. It is, I would hope, part of your mandate. You're the Premier. Hopefully you're leading this organization. So you would put that information out. Today you referred, when we were talking about southwestern Nova Scotia, you referred about the previous government's challenges and the organization that they created to fix the problems of the economy of southwestern Nova Scotia. I'm not sure what organization that was you were referring to. It has always been, as a person who lives there, it has been the citizens of that region, like every other region of this province, that'll have the solution. What they look for, more often than not, is a partner, somebody willing to work with them. And in this case, what they're caught in is in the middle of a spat between your government and the federal government about who's going to take credit for what. In actual fact, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening, other than the tourism season is approaching. And many of them recognize this will be the worst year for their business in its history if they get an opportunity actually to open and provide service to the people who come here. All because of a reckless decision, one that was made to cancel the ferry service from Yarmouth to Maine. It was interesting when the Premier talked about the commitments that he hasn't kept in the self-managed care program. It's one that I know the member from Richmond has talked about a great deal. There was a program in place by the former Liberal government that was cancelled by the John Ham government and then was reinstated by the McDonald government more recently. One that this government criticized quite a bit, but now has, I guess, embraced as being their program. So it is interesting to note that this NDP government is becoming the most expensive experiment Nova Scotians have ever undertaken. When you look at their first budget, it was almost $500 million in debt. Decisions that were made that were not actually told during the campaign. The Premier waves around and actually was quite critical of my platform, one that was fully costed, cost about $500,000 for over a 4-year period, and the Premier spent that in 3 months. In 3 months, but he forgot to give the details during the election campaign. $80 million on land, and Premier, I believe most Nova Scotians would like us to own more land, just not when you put it into the equation of you want to buy that with increased taxes. You want to raise your taxes so we can buy more land. That would be an interesting question for Nova Scotians to get to answer. I would dare say they'd say no. Pretty sure they'd say no. As a matter of fact, I'm hearing it quite a bit as I travel. When I go around and people say, you know, didn't the report that the Premier Commission, didn't the report that the Premier Commission say don't prepay bills? It did, but that part the Premier leaves it out. Yeah. And they say, didn't the Premier promise to balance his budget? He did, yeah. And now he's saying he kept that promise, but we're still in deficit. Didn't he say he was not going to raise taxes? Yeah, he did. Did he not say there were no program cuts? Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Did he say there was going to be a 1% reduction? Yeah, he did, and he kept that, I think. We're not sure yet because the information has not been tabled yet. But it would be interesting to get a chance to see that at the time. Mr. Chair, it's as I said earlier, it's becoming quite obvious that this new Democratic government is the most expensive experiment the people of our province have ever undertaken when it comes to this. I listened to the Premier talk about some changes to pension plans in the province, and when the day the budget was introduced, there were some small details there that were put out, seemed reasonable, people looked at, but as they start digging into it, there's becoming some great concern that changes will be made to, you know, when people retired in this province, they retired believing this would be their pension. That may not be the case. And I'm sure some of them who've retired more recently may want their jobs back. Are they going to have them? Because they made a deal with the province of Nova Scotia that, quite frankly, I'm going to retire based on this being the level of income that I'll have to look after myself into my retirement years. Well, that's changing on them. So should they come back to work? Should they come back to work? If they want their job back, are they going to receive them? These are all simple questions because they left under certain conditions with commitments made by a government that are being broken. So you know, they may say, listen, I want to work a little bit longer. They might want their job back to actually work longer, to invest in their pension plan, knowing now there are changes. Are they going to get that opportunity? It's one thing for those of us who are still working to have benefits changed, but when someone goes into retirement, you make decisions based on what your level of income is going to be. And you do that in good faith. And now there's grave concern about that. And it's a legitimate concern. And you know, the Premier says, what would you do with unfunded liability? Well, Premier, that's not understanding the anxiety people are feeling. That's not understanding the anxiety that those people who have retired, thinking their level of income would be here, coming now to be quite concerned about it. Parts of those changes are, quite frankly, moving decisions away from being open and transparent. If you look at it, those decisions could be made very quickly. Major changes to those plans could be made without coming here. Without coming here. Could be done not in an open, transparent way, but in one of the boardrooms. Nova Scotians are nervous about that. They have a right to be. It's not these people. These aren't Nova Scotians that are fear-mongering or anything. They have legitimate concerns about their pension plan and their retirement, and they're ones that I think Nova Scotians are looking for an answer for. You know, to throw out the good pieces to it and not lay the full details is not sincere. It's not a way to engage the members of those pension plans to have a positive solution to the challenges facing the province. There isn't a single member of the pension plans who doesn't believe things have to change. Not a single member. But they want it to be in an open, transparent way. And they're very concerned about changes, and particularly for retired members. What happens to their retirement fund? What happens if this goes through and gives government and the actuaries the ability to make changes without coming out and having it fully debated? Those are legitimate questions. You know, and for a government that talked about being open and transparent, that is not what those retirees are seeing. I don't believe it's too much to ask to have that debate here and make sure those changes, when they're going to be, come to the House. And I know that look forward to further having that conversation here in the House about how we're going to protect the retirement of so many Nova Scotians, and then make sure that that fund and that retirement package gets back to where it's being able to support itself. And I'll reiterate, there isn't a single member of the fund that have said they don't believe things should have to change, but they're very concerned about the changes that are taking place, particularly those that are going to affect retired members already, and those that are the changes that are going to allow this to operate really in secrecy and not in an open way for an honest debate here in the House. And I know what the intent was, but I do believe it is one that I hope government is revisiting, looking at in terms of some of the changes that will really affect the retirement of many Nova Scotians. You know, I'm hearing from people who've retired recently, and now they're thinking, geez, if I had known this was happening, I would have continued to work longer. You know, and it's a legitimate statement by them, that if they had known that the retirement package they thought they were going to receive was not going to be there for them, then they would have continued to work and provide good service to the people of our province. And I hope that as we begin to further debate this issue, that members of the government side recognize the concern that those retirees have, and I hope that we get an opportunity to hear from those retirees on this issue, because they put a human face to it, and they can tell us what are the challenges that they will be faced with in retirement. It is, I don't think it's too much to ask for people who work for an organization to be able to believe what the organization is telling them as it goes forward. It is, I think that's how we've always operated, and I think it's the way we should continue to operate. And they're prepared to help find solutions, as long as those solutions are not to the detriment of them. And Mr. Chair, I'm sure that many of them would have accepted these changes but continued to work, as opposed to retirement and then finding themselves being told that these changes will have a huge impact on their lifestyle going forward. So, you know, I know I've given the Premier a few things to think about. Hopefully he may answer one of those at some point. I'll ask again, and I hope the Premier will table the policy that says where government should be paying for the move of political staff, as well as who was it the Premier who authorized that? Was it the Deputy Premier? Was it his Chief of Staff? Letting us know who authorized that. And Premier and I have talked about this person, Shauna Martin, who has come to work for him, which was here during the election campaign. Prior to that, the Premier said they moved her here in August, which is accurate. It was when her stuff arrived. When her stuff arrived was in August, but she was here prior to that, and she was working in your office. You confirmed that in the question period. It would be interesting to know the date she actually arrived in the province of Nova Scotia and began to work for your party in the caucus office. She was seconded from the caucus office. She obviously had to come from there to government. Otherwise, she would have. If she was just coming from out west, she would have just gone directly into your office. You seconded her from there. So I do look forward to sometime, hopefully, getting an answer to that question. It is important that Nova Scotians get a sense that this is all above board, that it is accurate, that you and you know that if your party is hiring someone, that your party would actually pay for their move and not the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. And you know, it is important to know when she arrived and what she was doing in your office, as opposed to what we're hearing is when we moved her here, it was in August, which is not accurate. Even if you follow back your own response earlier, had said she was here prior to that. She officially came here to accept a job when yeah, no question about the Premier. She works for the Premier, and she was working for the Democratic Party here before you brought her into office. There was a number of people, other people who moved in. There was someone who moved in from New Brunswick. Did we pay for her moving expenses as well? Are there other political people that you moved into the province of Nova Scotia? Have you moved other people in from the province of from the outside of our province? Have we paid for other moving expenses? Is this the only? Is this the only? No, the Premier goes back. It goes back to if the Premier needs to know. I mean, I would suggest. I think $10,000 in legal fees over 3 years is an important question too. Shouldn't be paying. You know, I think traveling, paying for mileage, didn't travel is an important thing. I think it's important if you're paying for political moves that people in Nova Scotia know about it. I don't think it's a trivial thing. No, we haven't moved political staff. You don't move political staff. She doesn't have a civil service contract. She's not a member of the civil service. I mean, Nova Scotians are reasonable people. They'll understand. They'll help pay for a move of a civil servant. As a matter of fact, there's one in Justice that moved from Yarmouth to Halifax. We paid for that. Nova Scotians, I think, probably think that would be reasonable. But to pay for someone to come in, a political appointment of yours, to come in from Manitoba and pay, I don't know if they'd find that reasonable. All I asked was, are there other ones? It's a question about how you're spending money. I don't think Nova Scotians think that's unreasonable. This is the estimates. After you lectured the member from Inverness, well, where savings are going to be, there's 10,000. We could add that up. So I think it's important that Nova Scotians get an open and transparent view of how you're spending the money. Why would that be unreasonable? Why would it be unreasonable for you to justify and say why you believe it's appropriate to spend $10,000? Why do you think it would be inappropriate for you to tell Nova Scotians why you spend $10,000 to move a political staffer? I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be. I'll take my chair at the appropriate time. It's not a, it's interesting. I hear the member from Citadel Sable Island. He has a lot to say, Premier. He has a lot to say. You must have pumped him up before he came over here, did you? To say, be my cheerleader and behind you? Is that what you did? You gave him the old rah, rah, rah? Said, maybe next time you'll be one of the 12? Is that what you said to him? No. So.
That is so petty, Stephen. That's just so petty. That's something important. That's something about it.
Well,
That's something about the budget or the estimates.
Oh, he's not getting an answer.
We got departments sitting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to have this conversation with the most expensive experiment people of Nova Scotia have ever had. And as we go forward, I'm sure Nova Scotians will be hoping at some point to get an answer, something that they could count on. It's interesting. You know, they say they kept every commitment. The balanced budget commitment, I guess, wasn't one that was written down. I guess the no tax increase wasn't written down. I guess no cuts to programs wasn't written down. Those were commitments that people in the province, I think, believed that the government was going to keep. You know, it's interesting to note that the Premier has said every commitment he's kept. Well, so far, he's got two deficit budgets. The first one he brought in, and now this one. And it looks like we're on track for at least 3 more deficits to allow, I guess, to allow a future generation to pay for, to allow those that really don't have a voice right now to pay for. Because those who had a voice actually took beyond your commitment of a balanced budget. Instead, with 4 years, it looks as if the only one that might get balanced to be the one just prior to going to the polls again. The 4 or 5 that'll happen in between will all be in deficit. And so those that really, who aren't in this debate and don't have a voice, will end up paying for it. What's interesting is many of those people who don't have a voice now won't have an opportunity to be here because we are so uncompetitive now. And the Premier talked about his tax review. The tax review for a Premier that preached in his campaign to be open and transparent. What did he do when he became Premier? He canceled the parts of the tax review which were going to invite the public in, the parts that were going to be open, parts that were going to lay it out to people. Because why? Because why? Because why? The Premier is talking about being open and transparent. I can't imagine there's a single Nova Scotian that's still buying that song. Mr. Chair, when I look at the fact that you look at where we fit, not only in Atlantic Canada, but in Canada when it comes to taxes, that we are uncompetitive. We're uncompetitive. Personal income tax, which just got made worse by this budget. We're uncompetitive with when it comes to, we now have the highest consumption tax in Atlantic Canada. We have, I hear the Premier's looking for advice. Get some quick, because they don't lie, the numbers don't lie. We get one of the highest basic personal exemptions in personal income tax in the country. One of the lowest basic personal exemptions. You're the Premier. You know, Nova Scotians are looking for some solutions, and instead, but what they got was what they got was broken promises. They get an increase in 15%. Remember the idea of we were going to put a new? Remember the idea during the election campaign that we were going to create a new zone in Amherst. We're going to change the tax rate in Amherst to fix the problem with the New Brunswick border, to create a problem internally. Remember that idea? When you think about it now, it's kind of funny. It's kind of amusing when you think about it, right? Now, and instead of actually, and that's what we said to the people of Amherst, we're going to fix your problem, because what we're going to do is create a new tax zone for gasoline on the border. And what we're going to move that problem internally into our province. But instead of fixing that, we go to the URB to find them to say, listen, that really wasn't a good idea, and perhaps you might want to rethink that. 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 And the Premier, lo and behold, had a change of heart. Had a change of heart. But then what he did, then what he's done is he's gone and he's increased the HST. Not only is gas going up, but so is every other item. So children's clothing are going down. That's correct. That's correct. Mr. Premier, you're right. That's one item. That's one item Nova Scotians won't be crossing the border to buy. So, but they'll be crossing the border, Mr. Premier, to not only buy gas, but to buy other items that they require to live. So in actual fact, instead of doing what you said, instead of doing what you promised the people of Amherst in the election campaign, you've actually done the exact opposite. Not have you dealt with the issue of gasoline, but you made other issues a bigger problem with the increase of the HST. So, well, I hear the member who's behind you, Premier, who has a lot to say. Wait for the next New Brunswick budget. I'm actually kind of focused on Nova Scotia. I would hope that you would be, and I hope the Premier would be. So in actual fact, we're not competitive. We're not competitive. We're not competitive. That's the reality. And instead of dealing with that issue in an open way and having a comprehensive tax review in the province, what we've done is we've now moved it internally, away from public scrutiny and without public input. Why would we do that? Why would we do that? You came to power talking about being open and transparent. Why is it so wrong to have that debate in public? There are a lot of smart Nova Scotians, Mr. Premier, who would like to participate in that debate. People with an expertise in tax law. People with an expertise in how this is going to affect the economy of our province. Mr. Premier, you have people across the street in the Department of Finance who would like to have an open debate, who recognize how uncompetitive we are. And it was one of the things you talked about during the election campaign, was being open and transparent. Here's a wonderful opportunity for you to do that. Not only will we be open and transparent, and you can say that you did that for the people of Nova Scotia, but you actually might get results that will allow us to deal with our uncompetitiveness in terms of taxation. Wouldn't that be a positive thing for the economy of Nova Scotia? Create jobs, allow Nova Scotians to stay here, work here. I mean, looking for an opportunity at some point. Perhaps you would explain to the people of Nova Scotia how many people actually got a job with your home rebate program. How many? I think the answer might surprise you. 0. The people who won, you gave a rebate for housing stock, Premier. Premier, you gave a housing rebate. You gave a rebate for housing stock. That's what you did. That's what you did, Premier. You gave a rebate for housing stock. It was a reward. It was a reward for the Nova Scotia home builders for patting you on the back. And it was a reward. That's it. There was no jobs being created. Give us the evidence. I would ask you to table it, but we've asked for other stuff to be tabled, and we're still waiting for that. So at some point when you table the first stuff, if you could just table the evidence that you those jobs were created in the province of Nova Scotia. It would be, we very much would appreciate that. It's been a pleasure to have the conversation with you today.
The honourable member's time has expired.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize the honourable member from Cape Breton North.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to come back and resume here in estimates. And I couldn't help but notice the last time when I referred and was sharing my time with the member for Inverness, the Premier couldn't help but note that the member for Cape Breton North, you know, had a statement rather than a question. Would have wished to have that. And then I come in and find out, to an answer to a question from the member, who has many questions, the Premier decided to take 40 minutes and lecture him. So we'll take all the time we need here in the chamber, and maybe, just maybe, at some point, we can get the facts and the truth brought forward. And I will be sharing my time with the member for Cumberland South for this next hour. And I would maybe just start first, because I know the Premier was referencing this most extensive in the history of the province of Nova Scotia, the dog and pony show of the finance minister with his back to balance, and what Nova Scotians were now realizing the hope will be back to reality by this government. And can the Premier tell this committee what exactly formulated and the basis for saying it was the most extensive, and indeed if it was open and transparent?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that the member opposite has been in this House for quite a while. He certainly witnessed many budgets that came down when he was in the Executive Council and in the House, which had very little or only closed-door sessions with people prior to the budget. We adopted a much different approach. We invited people to submit their written comments either through the website or to an address that was provided to them, so that we could have input from people right across the province. In fact, if there were Nova Scotians who happened to be working outside the province but who still wanted to comment on the government's initiative in the upcoming budget, they could do that. In fact, over 1,000 people took the opportunity to do that, to provide advice. In addition, the Minister of Finance himself, he didn't send officials or other people out to do this. He went himself to 19 communities around the province, carried out the presentation himself. He made a commitment that he would be the first person in the room to set up the room and to make the presentation, and that he would stay as long as people wanted to talk to him, and he did, to make sure that there was an open opportunity for people to meet with the Minister of Finance for the purposes of discussing the budget of the province of Nova Scotia. He met in Whitney Pier, started off in Whitney Pier, a community that I don't think has ever seen a budget consultation. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the minister can point to, or the former minister can point to a time in the past that's done, but I don't think we don't, certainly the member representing that area couldn't remember a consultation that took place in Whitney Pier. Had meetings in Port Hawkesbury and Bridgewater and Antigonish, Stellarton, Dartmouth North, Eastern Passage, Kentville, Wolfville, an Acadian session via video conference, Lower Sackville, Liverpool, Yarmouth, Truro, Amherst, Digby, Tantallon, Halifax, Sheet Harbour. So around the province, touching in every area and making sure that he went into communities where these people may not have had an opportunity in the past to actually participate in the budget process. The purpose of this was to have public dialogue sessions to inform Nova Scotians about the situation that the province found itself in, and to ask them for their priorities on how they got back to balance, for their priorities. They were designed, there was a facilitator, there was assistance there. In addition to these consultations, and this is what I think was amusing, because I think it was the leader of the opposition, but also the various members of the third party talked about the CFIB and consultations and not attending a meeting put on by the CFIB. The interesting thing about that, Mr. Chairman, is that the Minister of Finance received the invitation to go to the CFIB meeting from the representative of the CFIB while they were consulting with them on the budget. Now, how can anyone say they didn't consult when that was exactly the point in time when they extended what was then an additional invitation to meet? So these consultations took place with a broad range of groups. There was business groups, there were community groups, there were labor groups. There was a full opportunity for the people of the province to engage like they have never been asked before on issues associated with the finances of this province. And I think what we are finding, of course, is that it has been a very successful budget. It has met the needs of the people of Nova Scotia. It has managed to accomplish, and you know, the member may not think this, but we do hear from an awful lot of people. We hear from people who are engaged in finance and in business, and people who are involved in seniors organizations, and they all say the same thing. They all say, yes, this was a tough budget. Yes, it was meant difficult choices, but it was fair. It achieved what had to be done in this year, and it was and is the right budget and a good budget for the people of this province. So I think the Minister of Finance has every reason to be proud of the things that he's undertaken, the consultation he's undertaken, and who has through this budget put us on a path back to financial health. You know, it is very much like you know, setting a course for a number of years forward. You know, there's an old story. I don't know if the member knows this, but there was a time that before a ship left port, they would have to have a medical professional come on board the ship and inspect the crew, and they would issue a document that was called a clean bill of health. That's actually where the expression clean bill of health comes from, and you couldn't get into another port. They wouldn't allow you alongside on a berth if you didn't have a clean bill of health from the previous port that you'd been in. So that's where that expression comes from. Well, this is very much like that. This is ensuring that we have what we need as we leave the current physical situation and make our way back to financial health. So that's very much what this budget is like. And I said to the Leader of the Opposition, you know, we kept every commitment that we made in the current year, and of course he knows that the platform, which of course he talked about us deriding his platform, but I remember members of the opposition dismissing it as a pamphlet and you know, being, you know, outraged about the simplicity with which we approach things, and in fact at one point in time they actually said that we couldn't be serious because we weren't spending enough. We weren't spending enough in this budget, in this platform, in order to be a realistic plan to go forward. But yet, we knew that there were significant difficulties. But the member from Annapolis also knows that the manner in which that was set out, which was the current year, was in fact last year, was the year that we came in. This year being the first year. So when I refer to the current year, I refer to the year that we come into government. So I think he's being somewhat disingenuous when he says you didn't keep the commitments in the current year, when in fact in the platform that referred to the year in which we came in. And I think he's quite right when he says the people of the province deserve to be spoken with forthrightly, and that's what I did during the campaign. That's what I'm doing now, and I'm telling them what it is that is necessary for us to get back to financial health. But I did find it amusing that the member, the Leader of the Opposition, talked about his platform being fully costed. Now, when you fully cost something, you have to do two things. Of course, you have to set out the actual costs associated with the program that you're going to put forward. But you also have to, in order for it to be fully costed, you also, of course, have to say where that money is going to come from. And of course, that was the part of the fully costing notion that got lost during the election campaign from the members of the Liberal Party. They could give you ballparks about what it was going to cost. They just couldn't tell you how they were going to pay for it. And in fact, if we were following that prescription, Mr. Chairman, we would be much deeper in debt today than we are now, because this is a government that's actually taken on the challenge of bringing us back to financial health. He talked about the home rebuild program and said it didn't create any jobs. Now, I don't know how it is that he thinks 1,500 homes could magically appear with no workers, with nobody swinging a hammer, with nobody buying a home. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, he says it very earnestly. He says, well, you know, show us some statistics about how many jobs were created. Well, Mr. Chairman, in order for there to be that kind of uptake on a program, there are, of course, models that can tell you how many hours of work goes into a home. And I have no problem supplying that to the member opposite, but it ought to be obvious that the impact on the economy for having the home builders build some 1,500 homes. And he talks about, oh, there was existing housing stock, and there was some. It wasn't a lot, but there was some. And, of course, they were unfinished houses. So what happened is we didn't want those home builders to be stuck with that stock. So we included those, but it meant that, of course, all of the finished work, all of the benefits that flowed to every other part of the supply chain, the building supply companies, the installers, the young apprentices who are going to be involved in that work, all of that was taken up by participants in the program who. And so it benefited, let's see who it benefits. It benefits the home buyer because they get the rebate. It benefits the home builder, the actual working people who go out there and swing a hammer and build the homes. The suppliers, whether they happen to be in the lumber industry or in the sale of appliances, the apprentices who were brought on site to learn their trade, young people who otherwise would be in other parts of the country, all of these people benefited directly from the program, and then the money that was generated from that went into the economy. And that's exactly the kind of stimulus project that I think people would want to see the government engage in. Not only is the program fully subscribed, the entire 1,500 taken up, there's actually a waiting list of people, I think some 50 or more people who would like to have access to the program. So it was an extraordinarily successful program. The range of benefits were broad, and it was the right commitment to make. It was I think, a very genuine and well thought out way to help an industry that was having a difficult time in the middle of a recessionary period. And I for one, am very proud of the fact that we took the time to consult with home builders and to come up with a piece of our program that was so beneficial. In addition to that, we have the efforts that we're making in Southwest Nova Scotia. And I want to be clear about this because I've heard the members opposite talk about, Southwest Nova Scotia and the federal government. Well, it should be very clear. There has never been a commitment from the federal government with respect to ferry service in Southwest Nova Scotia. In fact, when they brought down their budget, there was no mention of any support for that ferry service. And, from our perspective, we did wide-ranging analysis of that service well in advance of the decision being made. We spoke to many people. And not just through the department, but specifically through my office, because I understood this was going to be a very difficult and important decision. So I wanted to make sure that I was comfortable with the fact that this was a decision that we were going to make. So it was me who spoke to the governor of Maine. It was me who spoke to the senators in Maine. It was I who held a comprehensive session to ensure that I knew, all of the facts surrounding that service. And I am comfortable, and I understand that this is a difficult time for that area of the province. But ultimately, investing in proper economic development measures in that area will lead to a stronger economy in southwest Nova Scotia. And it's a funny thing, because they'll always say two things. They'll always say, it was terrible, this was a terrible, wrong-headed decision, it should never have been made, you've cut the legs out from underneath the tourist industry in Yarmouth, but yet only it wasn't anybody in Nova Scotia who brought in the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative. That was an initiative of the government of the United States. They were the ones who looked at the security initiatives and said, we have to require American citizens to have passports. And we saw, after 2001, we saw the precipitous decline in the number of people who were using that service. There's no reason, there's no secret as to why that got down to some 23,000 people being the minimum number that were the minimal number that was coming across on the CAT. And then they'll say, yes, well, the CAT was the wrong boat. What we really needed was another boat. But they don't have another boat, and they don't have another operator, and in fact, the operator that was there before gave way to the CAT. So what I'm happy about is the fact that we now see actual entrepreneurship taking root, and we see things happening there that are coming about as a result of the initiative of the people in the area. And just as an example, there is now a flight service in there that is not subsidized by the people of Nova Scotia. This is a very positive thing. I'm very happy to see this happen. And I think that out of this will, in fact, there may, in fact, be another service that can serve that market, but it will come about because the government is not displacing it by subsidizing a service that is not sustainable. You see, when you do that, when you sustain a service by large subsidies, another service that might have the capacity to be able to sustain itself on that run won't come about because it's being displaced. And that's the problem with with that kind of a program. Anyway, I realized, and I don't want to take up all the time for the member from Cape Breton North, because I know he's got some additional genuine questions that he wants to ask, and I want to make sure he has time to do that.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton North.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's interesting, it's telling about this Premier and his government when it comes to trying to deal with an issue. When he was asked a question, decided to go from 332 shortly thereafter, now 352, with regards to these discussions here today. But I want to go back to where the question was, and I asked him about back to balance.
Okay. Yep.
And as he said, the most extensive process in Nova Scotia's history. Well, I watched a process, and it may have been extensive, but it wasn't open and transparent. It was based upon, Mr. Premier, as you know, not having correct information that was being provided to Nova Scotians in the documents that were presented, because we also now know that this Premier and his Minister of Finance took it upon themselves to make sure the numbers would be manipulated in a way to try and legitimate their arguments of a structural deficit, so the documents could have a $1.4 billion number accelerated there, that's what they're going to try to achieve over the course of their term. And Mr. Chair, what we also know is that when this Premier came in and had to find a way to try and paper over the ill-founded and bad decisions that they know they were going to make and have made for Nova Scotians, that they had to find a way. And so they went to Deloitte. They said, you have to use the numbers. You have to use the numbers from the May 2009 budget and estimates that we voted against. Premier himself stood in this House and said, you know, let's get on with things, and we're going to bring down the government. So don't make any assumptions since the election. Make nothing else. The fact that the government now, in creating a needless election of the day, during what they say, it may have been success for the numbers. And this is the one and only time that that Premier, who have made history, Mr. Chair, he'll make history again by being the only one-term Premier in the province of Nova Scotia, because Nova Scotians are up on what he's up to, and with the cronies around him and his spin doctors and all the staff he's brought in, you wanted to bring in from Manitoba and pay them. Doesn't matter. Money has no object when it comes to an NDPer, if they're in Manitoba or any extent in the province. And Mr. Premier, people understand, you had a flawed process. And we went to some of those sessions, and yes, I was at the first one in Whitney Pier. Yes, I was. And so was a member from Cape Breton Nova there. And there were other members that were there, and we were there. The one thing I know about our attendance, and we had staff attend every one, and I was at a couple of these sessions, but when we went, we said it was a public consultation. So we should be respectful and watch. And be there so people know we have an interest in what this budget consultation is going to be. But he also talked about the Minister of Finance dealing with this. Well, he set just like the Deloitte thing, they set parameters to manipulate an outcome that suited their purpose. Not one that was based on fact or truthful, but it was wrong. And this Premier and his minister sat there and he told people, he set parameters. Now so he couldn't be the bad cop, he went out and again, what the government has a tendency of doing is hired more consultants. So he hired more consultants to control a process so that they would do the dirty work for the minister of shutting down people in the meetings. And so as to make sure that some of the comments were there, he made sure if there was an opportunity where an NDP member was there, get at the tables, influence the discussion. While other members never sat at the tables, the NDP members, in fact, the one sitting behind the Premier right now, the member for Antigonish, sat at tables and wanted to be part of it. But not only that, they sent their invitations out to their special interest groups and invited them to come, Mr. Chair, to go around. And so I know when he talks about extensive, there was something extensive, all right. It was a very extensive, expensive process to again try to legitimate the bad decisions that the Dexter NDP have brought forward, to try and legitimate the spin doctoring of the numbers and the presentation of numbers, Mr. Chair. And I've seen people trying to report, and I've seen a facilitator take the mic out of someone's hand because, well, you've had your say. He said the minister would stand around. I also was in Whitney Pier, and someone says to me, the minister came by and I asked a question. He refused to even answer it. And I'll tell you what the question was, Mr. Chair, because the person said, well, Mr. Minister, these are your numbers here, but can I talk to you about the Deloitte report and your assumptions for that? And of which the Minister of Finance said, I'm not here to talk about Deloitte. We're here to talk about this. So he wouldn't even get into the discussion. The discussion and the dialogue was one-sided. If you agreed with the NDP, you got a green light. And if you had a question, the NDP, you were shut down. And you know, when I hear about the discussions, and I remember being at the Sydney Area Chamber of Commerce luncheon with the Minister of Finance there, and everyone's saying a great turnout. Well, I counted 12 staff or consultants that the minister had brought in to try and again spin this process. I know the discussion at that point, because we were there at the table at the Chamber of Commerce, and people then were starting to question where this government was going with this exercise, and that was at the beginning of it. And as it moved, certain aspects of that process moved as well. So for the Premier to try and say that they had some open and transparent and extensive process, I said it was extensive and also expensive, because as with anything else, if this government finds itself incapable of standing up for itself and speaking for itself, they hire consultants. So they go after another consultant. And you'll see that pattern because they aren't prepared to take the leadership, Mr. Chair, necessary. This Premier is not prepared to take the leadership necessary to put the facts before the public, the real facts, the truthful numbers that are out there from the last budget. And you know, Premier, you know the spin doctoring job that you and your Minister of Finance have been up to around this province. And history History, Mr. Chair, is going to prove otherwise, because he wants to dismiss the CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And on Hollis Street this week, I was in a shop with an entrepreneur. And you know what the entrepreneur said to me? He asked the question, before you leave, can I ask you, truly, they're saying about is the CFIB standing up and speaking up for us? He said, I want to know, because we've been a member. And I was concerned I actually thought he was against the CFIB. And I said, no, I'm going to tell you, they're speaking up, and they're speaking up to the point that the government is trying to discredit them. And you know what he said? I'm glad to hear that, because I wanted to know my membership dues were of value. Because he said what the government is doing, and with this budget and the tax increases Mr. Premier done, people have said from one end of the province to the other, another little shop I go in and she says, you know, with the budget out, people aren't coming in as much. Because the tax, and it's true, I asked the entrepreneurs. Ask the entrepreneurs. And you know what they said? Because they don't know, because consumers are trying to get the full extent of the negative impact of this NDP deficit budget and a tax, spend, and borrow budget, which ultimately is taxing every Nova Scotian and future generations. That is the budget brought forward by NDP. Those are the entrepreneurs, and they're speaking and saying this Premier doesn't get it. But he's putting it to us, and he's hurting us in our ability to run a small business in this province. And the other thing, the Premier's talked, you know, I know he was trying to, obviously the leader of the official opposition got under his skin when he talked about the housing programs, because he needed to try and go back over lost ground that he didn't, he's trying to recover from, and talking about the program. And then he said, you know, well, taxes are up, but we don't have the tax on kids' clothing. Well, if you're a family trying to buy a house for a family, if it's a newly constructed house, the cost of that house has gone up way more with your tax increase, Premier, than any children's clothes is going to be. That's the impact on working families in this province. You want to talk about this budget, you can cut and paste, and what it is, I say it's the Robin Hood, but a modern day one where they take from the middle class to give to the middle class and move around the shell game that's happening. And just maybe if you're lucky, you'll be one of a rare number of Nova Scotian families where you might get a couple extra bucks while everyone else has paid a price for it. That, Mr. Chair, is what this Premier and his Minister of Finance has inflicted on the people of Nova Scotia. And that is something, when you talk about a back-to-balance process, well, we'd like to get them back to reality. Because Nova Scotians, from one end of the province to the other, are asking themselves, what the heck did we do? But you know something? In a democracy, the electorate are always right. And they will be right again when they are moved along appropriately. And there is history made once again with a one-term wonder government. And you know, Mr. Speaker, there might have been an orange tide, but it brought in a lot of dead wood with it. And I'll tell you, people are going to quickly deal with that dead wood and make sure it is quickly done, receives its proper treatment. And you know, Mr. Chair, the Premier talked about the CAT. He wanted to go back to the CAT process and try and distract again. What we know is this Premier, this NDP socialist government that talks about the people. Oh, there's going to be many more times coming before we're finished estimates, Premier. And I'll tell you, for an industry that generated hundreds of jobs, working families taking home a paycheck, and for this Premier and his cabinet to be so petty over what now amounts to about $3 million to cut out hundreds of jobs, 500 direct jobs in the area. He keeps spinning the cost of a subsidy. We've all said that we'd look at it, but he has devastated southwest Nova Scotia. He can't get around that, and he knows it because the people of southwest Nova Scotia are speaking about the impact of this socialist regime on their communities. Because what it is, if we don't like what you folks are saying, we'll put the political wrath upon you, and they've done that in southwest Nova Scotia. And Mr. Chair, I've got many more items to discuss with the Premier in ensuing time. At this point, I'll turn over my time to the honourable member for Cumberland South.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And how much time?
You've got approximately 30 minutes.
30 minutes. Thank you.
I think it'd be a good time to consider a break. I believe the.
Sure. No, sure.
Sure. So we'll stand recess.
Chair, beyond the Premier's time, not mine, though, right?
We will stand recessed. Order, please. The Committee on Supply will now be called to order. The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I understand right, you say I have 29 minutes?
29 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank, first of all, thank the Premier and the staff for being here today to talk about issues of, under the Premier's obviously responsibility and others I'm sure he'll be asked about. I listened quite intently there the last few minutes, and I see that if I allow the Premier to get up to try to answer a question I may ask, I may not gain the floor again. So I think I'll probably going to share some information that I just shared with in the Red Room with the Minister of Justice, and it's in regards to really what I want to speak to a Premier is credibility and how people in this province, especially our young people, in their observations, see politicians and why I believe they've arrived at that today. And I know we'll have different opinions on many issues. I'm sure this will be one, but I just want to begin by saying that I was telling them next door that a few weeks back, I speak to a lot of classrooms like I know a lot of MLAs do, and so I spoke to a grade 10 class and get a lot of questions, but one question from one young gentleman really struck me. That he said, one thing I'd like to know from you as a politician, he said, how can you put yourself out there to promise or to assure people if you represent them, they elect you, that you'll do certain things and then not do it, basically. I mean, that was kind of in a nutshell. And I said, well, I guess I would have to say this, that as an MLA, an individual MLA, as we all do in the doorstep, people want to commit to all various types of things, everything from paving roads to building buildings to all kinds of things. And I tried to always pride myself to think I always tried to assure people the only one promise I could ever really make to anyone would be to do the best I could. And that meant some days have to say no, and I've said that a lot over the last number of years. And then other times, obviously, with a lot of hard work, you're able to be a little more successful. And I do want to say, Premier, starting out, and I've said this at my caucus office, and I've said it for a number of years with various caucus members that I sit around the table with now and I have in the past. I really believe, and I've told my kids this as well, I really believe if I want the people to put their trust in me to come down here to represent them, and probably even more so than that, if someone wants to be the Premier of the province, to lead this province, to represent us basically worldwide, anywhere, that there's two things should happen. You should promise to do the things you can, and if you're not sure, no matter what the circumstances are, that you can't deliver, you should make a promise. So that would probably mean a pretty boring election. And I can well imagine what the Premier's thinking right now. And in fact, Premier, we came through the doors together here. We come in this place the same day. And I remember sitting back here. I actually ended up right back where I started, I guess. I was in the back row beside the Minister of Transportation. That's right. And I remember being interviewed by a young girl with the news that talked about, she wanted to know how it felt sitting in one of these chairs as opposed to sitting in a police car. And I told her, I said, I'll tell you a little story that when I was first campaigning down in River Hibbert, seniors building down there, and of course knocking on doors, I was still a police officer at the time because I'd actually campaigned about a year before before the election was called. So I knocked on this door, and this little lady, she's probably in her mid-80s, really small, short little lady, very nice person, answered the door, and I gave her my spiel, said I knew who I was, and she listened to me, and she said, yeah, I know who you are. She said, I've read about you in the paper. And I said, well, I've told you what I wanted to hear about. Is there anything, or I'm here for? Can you tell me, do you have any concerns or anything you want to ask me? She said, yeah, I have one question for you. Now, this little lady's really short. She's looking up at me, and she said, I have one question for you. She said, why are you going to go from one side of the law to the other? And I laughed too, I laughed, but she didn't. And I went home and said to my wife that night, I'm not so sure now, I'm not so sure about this anymore. If that's what people think, is that really where we want to go? But anyway, but I want to say, Mr. Chair, that I have the utmost respect for anyone who puts their name on a ballot and is able to go out there and they work hard. Communities are all different. Work hard and get the support of people, and then people want you to come here and they want you to represent them. And the other thing I was told by an elderly gentleman who's been in politics for many, many years when I first get into this, he said, Murray, you're going to have to make a choice. When you get into politics, you'll be faced with making a choice, and here's the choice you're going to face. People or the politics of it. and you're going to be accused of not being a team player. You're going to be accused of, if you want to stay in politics, survive, you have to, you have to do this, you have to do that. But he said you'll have to make a choice along the way. It's either people or politics. And I took real heed to that advice, and I would like to think that over the years that I chose the people over the politics, even probably to my own peril, sometimes my own party at the time, even as Speaker, having to take a stand. In fact, in committee, get down and take a member's place to ask about my own government, about a decision they were going to make about a school in my own area, or a fire department, or fire service. And, but I made those decisions and felt that it was important to stand up for people, because the people sent me here to represent them, not to represent myself, and to always try to remember that the voice here is the voice that they elected, and that's the only voice they have here. So anyway, but just back to this young fellow. So the Premier would remember a few years back, we spent a tremendous amount of money in Democracy 250. And of course, we were holding up the parliamentary process in this country in the voting process. But I remember one of the things that we really wanted to find out was why people in this province, why we continue to have a decrease in the number of people that want to turn out to vote. Well, I think that grade 10 class, like other classes I've spoken to, told me very loud and clear what they think. I mean, they're young people. They're young adults getting prepared to assume the responsibility of running our province, communities. There's elected people in that room. There are professional people. There are people that will go into construction work, and there will be some people that will have to leave to find the type of career they want to follow. But their concern was, how could I, or how could anyone, come to their house and talk to their mom and dad and convince them that we were going to do certain things or stand up for certain things, and then get elected and say, well, I didn't realize the way things were. Now, Premier sat over on this side of the House from 98 till he was elected Premier in 2009. And the Premier's a smart man. He sat through many budgets, listened to many debates, took part in legislation, took part in all sorts of issues that were brought forward. Some he agreed with and some he didn't. But I don't think the Premier was oblivious to anything that was going on around him in this House, whether it was financial or commitments. Now, it kind of leads me to this, that, since this session began, I've stood in the House every day during the daily routine, and I'm tabling on behalf of people of all Cumberland County, not just Cumberland South, because I've been approached, I can tell you, by a lot of people in Cumberland County, business people, individuals, seniors, students, disabled, who are wondering what's happened to Cumberland County. And so the petition that I table here each and every day, I think we're up over to 1,700 names, and we got quite a few more yet to come. But the question I keep being asked over and over again is, how could someone who wants to be the Premier in Nova Scotia say something during a campaign, but then once is elected that position, simply change direction and then say, well, we didn't. We weren't aware of this, or we didn't know that. And I'm back to what I said earlier. You make the promises you can keep, and the ones you can't keep, just don't make them. To me, it's pretty simple. I mean, and I bet there's a lot of MLAs here, a lot of rural MLAs on the opposite side of the House. How many during the campaign knocked on somebody's door and they said, yeah, I'll support you, I want to vote for you, I'm looking for a change, and I want you to pave my road. Are you going to be able to pave my road for me? When people ask me that, I tell them I have no idea. I'll promise you I'll put that issue forward to whoever the department or whoever the minister or whoever governs at the time. I'll put a list in, and I've done that. Thank you, Minister. But I couldn't in all good conscience look them in the eye and say, if you elect me, this road will be paved. Because, I heard that many times over during the campaigns that I was involved in, that some people felt that they were comfortable telling people that, and that's entirely up to them, and if you're comfortable making commitments that somebody else is going to have to come forward on, then that's okay. I find it difficult to do that. But Mr. Chair, I've tabled this. When I saw this headline myself, I remember during that time, it was May 13th, it was Chronicle Herald, and the headline said, Dexter says he'd keep Tory promises. And when I read the whole story, but the line that stood out to me was, and this is a quote from the Premier, now the Premier, he said, if they, and when he said they, I assume he's talking about the previous government, if they have made a commitment to a community, then we'll honor it. Now, 2 weeks ago, the honourable member for Cumberland North, and I'm assuming that he was there on behalf of the Minister of Transportation, and he was there on behalf of the Premier and the government, made an announcement that this year, during this construction season, the North Port Bridge will be replaced. And I want to congratulate them because that bridge absolutely has to be replaced. There's no question about it. It needs to be done. And I congratulate the member, congratulate the government. In fact, you know, the school bus driver at the end of it just refused to travel over that bridge with the kids in there. He wasn't going to take the chance, and so he refused to go over it. And anyway, so the bridge was closed, and there's a commitment from the government to replace it. And again, I applaud the government's initiative to move forward on that. Now, something I'd like to ask the Premier, I'm not going to ask him yet because I don't want to give up my time on the floor, but if I were to ask the Premier, so the Minister of Transportation, who's a great MLA and a good minister, if he left his portfolio next month, which we hope he doesn't, he'll stay there, he's doing a good job, but if he left his position next month, and the member from another riding within the government assumed that responsibility, and then this fall went up to a public meeting and said, and the bridge wasn't finished by then, the work wasn't done, and if he was asked, or she was asked, your government promised back in April, May, to replace this bridge. Now there was, my understanding, maybe the minister will correct me, maybe I'm wrong, I understand there's no design yet. There's no tenders actually been put out yet. There's no actual work on the site being done yet. But the government made the commitment. So if you change ministers, do you think it'd be fair now if the next new minister went up and wrote to a public meeting and said to people in Northport, well, wait now, that was the former minister. There was no tender, there was no written letter signed from the minister to the warden, for example, to say we're replacing that. So really, there was really no commitment to do it. It was really just words. There was really no commitment. I don't think anybody would accept that. I know I wouldn't. I don't think the Premier, I know the minister wouldn't. The member from Cumberland North wouldn't accept that. I mean, he was sent there on behalf of the government. So again, back to when I read the Premier's words and his commitment, I thought, you know, I've known this gentleman, and he's a gentleman. I've known him for a number of years, and I believe what he's saying here. He's saying commitments that were made to communities are going to be honored. But then we get in here, and I heard in the fall words to the effect, we're going to meet almost all of the commitments. Not all of them, not some of them. You didn't say back then, well, I'll do some or part or whatever. He said a commitment made to a community, we'll honor it. Well, Mr. Chair, I want to talk about Spring Hill for a moment here. Spring Hill is a community that I know the Premier's been there himself. In fact, he was there when they had the anniversary of the 1958 bump. So Spring Hill is a community that's faced many, many hardships over the years. In 1891, you know, there were many young men and boys killed in the mines. In 1956, the explosion. 1958, the bump. 1957, a Main Street fire that devastated the community, cleaned it out. In the early 70s, another fire that cleaned it out. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, you know, I'd have to look at Hansard to see exactly what was said, but basically I was told in the Review Room the other day that, you know, people have to get over it and get on with life. Well, and that it's over. Well, I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the people in the community I live in, Spring Hill, for them, it's never over. It's a town of great tenacity. It's a town that Mayor Ralph Gilroy said many, many years ago, with all the tragedies and all the downturn and everything that the community faced, his words were, there'll always be a Spring Hill, and I believe there always will be a Spring Hill no matter what. However, it's a town that's faced many, many challenges over the years. And, you know, it hasn't been easy when you live in a community. There's no doubt about it. The town of Spring Hill has high property taxes. That makes it very difficult to attract both new business and to attract new homeowners. You know, and I try to explain this to Minister of Justice that you have to live there, you have to be part of the community, you have to feel it, understand, and for it to be part of your life, to really understand how the community could be so upset today over the loss of what they saw was going to be finally a positive for the community. You know, and somebody could say, well, you know, you were there for 12 years, what'd you do to help them? Well, you know, it's not easy. When you're trying to track something into a community that has some debt, has some high taxes. But you know, since I've been around, we've put in a new sewage treatment plant. I really believe infrastructure will help the community in the future. We put in a new water treatment system. I know the Minister of Transportation is a hockey fan. Unfortunately, it's Boston, but that's okay. Well, my son's a fan of them as well. But you know, the community center in Spring Hill, we have a new one. But you know, again, it seems like anything could happen in a community to be a tragedy would happen in Spring Hill. A few years ago, one of these metal-clad type rinks that was in Spring Hill it was during a time, was a heavy snowfall in the community, and Bob Arsenault was the maintenance guy working that day, and there was a tournament on with a lot of young kids and a lot of parents in the building, about 100, I think, at the time. And the story I like to tell, Randy Ryan, who is he's actually my landlord, but he's a dentist in Spring Hill. He was in the rink that day, and Bobby Arsenault heard one of the guide wires that usually guides off the girders, steel girders, snapped. So one of the parents told him. Bob went down and had a look at it. He thought, there's something wrong here. He's not an engineer, but he's a smart guy. And Bob said, it doesn't make sense. That guide wire snapped for some reason. There's a lot of snow on the roof, a lot of weight. He began to wonder if maybe, there could be an issue here. So Bob decided to get the adults and the children out of the rink. So, here's a community that's faced all those tragedies I talked to you about already. We definitely don't need another one. So they asked the kids to get the parents, or asked the parents to get the children, off the ice, and not to get them in any kind of panic, but to move them off the ice, out the door, and off the end of the ice, and out the front door. So they did. But as they're doing that, and they're trying to do it calmly so that no one panics, the second guide wire on one of these girders snaps. Then the third one snapped, and as they start snapping, and Randy Ryan tells me the story, if you can picture this. Now, here are a bunch of young children on the ice, kids on the benches. They get them all on the ice, and they're coming towards Randy at the door. And as those wires started to snap, the girders that hold the building up started to collapse on the ice. Behind the kids as they're coming off the ice. Now, these kids are coming towards the doors, and the far end, the girders are starting to fall. And you can just picture what you would feel like to see that happening. So, anyway, thankfully, God was with that community on that day, and they got all those children and those adults just get out within a very few seconds, or it would have been another tragedy in the community. The only reason, Mr. Chair, Mr. Premier, I'm trying to relate, and as I did with the minister earlier, it's a community you have to have been part of and grown up in, and have seen over the years how no matter the community just starts to move ahead a bit, and it's like it slips and falls and steps back again, slides back. It just, so the infrastructure for me is very important. The water system, the treatment, of course, the sewage treatment. The community college just had a major renovation. The building looks great. This community center, and I have to give credit where it's due. The mayor of the time was the honorable member who used to be a member in this house, Mr. Guy Brown, who was the mayor at the time. Even as ill as he was, undertook to replace this facility, and it turned out to be a $6.5 million community center for the town of Spring Hill. Now, many people said it can't be done. There's not enough people in this community no matter how far out you reach to former Spring Hill, you cannot replace that with that type of facility. Well, the Mayor Brown himself took it on, raising private money. The 3 levels of government put money in. The town of Spring Hill's portion, actually, because it did not have any money, was the insurance money they had. And then, Dr. Ham made sure the province's third was in. At the end of the day, the cost escalated, and thankfully to the former Premier, Premier Rodney McDonald, through the provincial programs, they found an additional $500,000 to complete that project. Now, today, that project is something that I think we hold up on high in Spring Hill from around the province. It's a facility we're very proud of, and it's actually given the community a real boost in regards to confidence. The announcement of the correctional center for Spring Hill. The correctional center for Spring Hill was, we thought finally, now, and I understand, I knew if that correctional center wasn't built in Spring Hill, it would never be built in Cumberland County. Because we're bordered on the north by New Brunswick, that really limits the opportunity for clients for that facility to be, for transportation issues. So really you only have what's to the southeast, the Colchester area. So I knew that if we were able to keep that facility open long enough before the fire marshal closed, that the only way and even staff in the Department of Justice told me that, you're going to have to find a partner if you're going to be able to justify a correctional facility for Spring Hill, or for Cumberland County. So in their search, they come back and said to me, there's a partner there we can have. If we can establish a relationship with a partner, you'll be able to justify, because we'll be able to reduce the operating costs. So I'd met with Minister Stockwell Day on 2 occasions in Ottawa. The Assistant Commissioner, in his recommendation, I met with the Assistant Commissioner of Corrections in Ottawa, in Moncton, and then not too long ago here with Minister Vic Taves, who's now the Minister of Public Safety. What was mentioned to me, and I understand, first of all, we have federal employees and we have provincial employees, and if you have 2 adjoining facilities, you're going to have some union issues, and I understand that. But they quickly identified the opportunity in regards to maintenance laundry, kitchen facilities, as services and programs. Tremendous opportunity for training. Right now, the federal government of Canada, through corrections, and not right till today, but as of the last year, they put on, I think, at least 2 core training programs. And because there isn't any space that they see close by that's adequate to do that, they provide the core training at the local community center, the one I just talked about that the community built. So here they're putting on core training for corrections in the community center that there's many, many other uses for, but it's only because they don't have the ability to use another facility. The federal government also owns in Spring Hill an armories, which I don't know if anyone's ever from here has been there, Premier, I don't know if you've been there, but I can tell you this armories was built, designed with great classrooms, smaller size gymnasium, and an underground shooting range. Tremendous opportunity if someone were to take it upon to work with the federal government, to work with the province, to provide core training at that armories, with the ability to do year-round training, actually, with an underground range and with those classroom space. Community college, we have a new principal there, Mr. McCormick. Just a great attitude and a very forward vision individual, really wanting to do some progressive things. Edgar McLeod, who is the director of the Atlantic Police Academy, talked to Edgar about this and about the possibility of opportunities for training, making it kind of a security, correctional, police type training in the area. Very keen on doing that. So when the new government took over, and the new government tonight, I may not get a chance to do it today, maybe I'll do it tomorrow, whenever my next term will come up. When the issue of the correctional facility came up, and the fact that it was it was in jeopardy. I'll say that. When it was first mentioned, it was in jeopardy. And I knew that, when I heard that, I knew that that meant Cumberland County was going to lose here. The questions I keep asking over and over again, I've asked the minister, I think I've asked the Premier here in question period, and I'll keep asking because I can't get the answers, is this. Since the government took over and the government made a commitment to do a review, I have to accept that. What I can't accept is this, and I'm still waiting today. I would like to know who picked up the ball and went and met with the federal government and had some sense of what programs are offered federally, what could be offered, or what are offered provincially, and where's there an opportunity to share and save money? Is it a laundry that is built or could be built that the federal government would buy from the province, or vice versa? Is it maintenance? Is it kitchen services that the province could buy from the feds? And I can tell you, my discussions with them, they're very interested to find some sort of an opportunity to share those services. It meant saving money or an opportunity to generate revenue. But what they brought up was this. There's an agreement that we signed in 2006. Mr. Hansberger, who was the executive director of corrections at the time, I believe he was actually the one that did the work, and we signed it with the federal government about the opportunity to actually move into agreements like this, or to accept federal inmates or in provincial institutions, or provincial inmates in federal institutions. One thing they identified is they don't have the administration, as an example, nights and weekends to process those who may be brought back who are serving federal time. Their question was, could we, with an adjoining facility, actually allot X number of beds that could be held for them, where they could pay per diems? Now, pretty creative thinking when you think about it, because it's similar to what the DVA does with our long-term care facilities, where they purchase X number of beds, pay for those beds, maintain those, and they're there from them. Now, we can't put long-term care folks into those. If there's 10 in Spring Hill, as an example. If they're down to 6 or 7, we can't fill that with other long-term care patients. It has to be veterans. So they were suggesting a similar type of a situation where per diems could be paid, or maybe we could hold beds or cell space for their inmates, and actually they would know that we'd have staff in place and they'd be there with them. An opportunity actually to generate revenue, again, for the province. My point in all this, Mr. Chair, through you to speak to the Premier, is to this point, from what I understand, no one has followed up on that. If there's no writing of the Northport Bridge, there's nothing writing, but I trust the Premier's word that it'll be built. But no one has even taken upon themselves to go ask them the question, to sit down and say, here's what this guy's telling us. Is he all wet or what? You know, no one has even asked the question. Now, Geothermal energy. I remember the Premier said to me, I raised it with him, he said, well, you can get geothermal energy anywhere. You're absolutely right. Anywhere there's water, you can get geothermal energy. What you can't get mine water, which is 15 to 20 degrees warmer than groundwater. What you can't get is the ability to have a unlimited resource that geologists and all the engineers have looked at and studied. That community center I talked about, Spring Hill, that's built, I think it's one of, if it's not the only one, it's one of the only ones heated with ice cube and the technologies in North America that we're aware of, using mine water. ROPEC plastics plant, I think, is 80,000 square feet, reduced their energy costs by 40%. But my point to all this, Mr. Chair, through you to the Premier, is no one's even asked the questions. If you come back and said, we talked to engineers, we met with the federal government on this date and this date, we proposed this, we proposed all those things I just talked about, and they say no, well, I may not like it any more than I like it today, but I'd have to accept that. If someone said, we brought engineers to Spring Hill, and we looked at the geothermal, we looked at the technologies that's available, we looked at the difference in groundwater versus coal mine water, we've done a comparison of what it would cost to build, we've done all that, and it doesn't work. It won't work. The engineer, then I'd have to, I may not like it, but I'd have to accept it. Now, if you think about the scenario I just used of the bridge, so 2006, and I've got a letter here that Premier, I know will, it's a message to the citizens of Cumberland County, and I'm going to do this. I probably won't get time today. You say my time's almost up, Mr. Chair, but before this is over, I will. This was submitted by the former candidate for the NDP, the former president of Cumberland South NDP party, that he sent to the local paper. The the town of Spring Hill and the Department of Justice began working in 2006. There were some issues around water lines across this land. Eventually, I think 34 acres was transferred to the province. I'm sorry, yeah, to the province from the town. There was a lot of resource and money expended to move this project forward. The design work was all done, which we still have. The survey was done, the land was transferred. Now, maybe the Premier would think somebody would do this. I certainly wouldn't do this. I went as a Minister of the Crown. My colleague from Colchester, Muscogee Valley, the Honourable Minister Brooke Taylor, who was the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, he went as a Minister of the Crown. We went there with the blessing and the direction of the Premier at the time to make the announcement. We had a public announcement. We told them what the timelines were. There was going to be a public meeting that summer in Spring Hill, and we would begin clearing the land in the fall. Now, Premier will probably come back and say, announcement made on the eve of an election. Well, I can tell you this. The day I stood there, the farthest thing in my mind was an election, because I thought we were probably at least a year away from election. There's only one group that knew we were going to election that time, and that was the government today, because they brought the government down. So anyway, I see I got a rise on him. Finally got a rise on Mr. Speaker. Anyway, Speaker, and you know, Mr. Speaker, I see my time's running out, but I will be back, Mr. Speaker, to enlighten the Premier a little further about why young people in our province don't vote is because they don't trust politicians. You know why they don't trust politicians, Mr. Speaker? That right there. They expect, as an MLA or a Premier, they expect when you're going to put your name out there, they expect you're going to keep your word. And when you don't keep your word, Mr. Speaker, when you don't keep your word, Mr. Speaker, you know, Mr. Speaker, lots of cat calls from over there. They may think it's funny for Spring Hill, but I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, I think it's pretty serious. And the Minister, I'll tell you this before I leave, the Minister down there said, it's over, get over it. Well, I'm going to tell you, for Spring Hill, it was never over. When those miners were trapped underground, they never gave up. They don't expect me to give up.
Please.
I won't. And this
Time allotted for the Progressive Conservatives has elapsed. We'll now turn to the Liberal Caucus, the Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I do welcome the opportunity to have some questions and perhaps some dialogue with the Premier. It's not every day that members of the House get to speak directly to the Premier in the House, and I appreciate that up to now he's been giving candid answers, and there's been some good debate. And again, it affords me the opportunity to talk some about my riding and about some of the issues that have been important to me in the almost 7 years that I've been here in the legislature with the Premier. And I know some of these issues he will have heard me speak about before, but I think it's an opportunity to find out a little bit about priorities that the Premier has and where he's going. A lot of my colleagues have already asked questions around the finances of the province, and I am the former finance critic for our party, but not the current finance critic. And I thought I would go around to some other issues rather than the financial issues, at least in the initial go-round to the estimates discussion. But I know there are a lot of initiatives underway in the province and priorities in the province, some of which the government has put resources behind and supported, and others that I'm not sure where they stand on. So I wanted to go and look at that to some degree. As the Premier knows, the riding of Clayton Park is unique in a number of ways. One of them is the size of the riding in population, and it is by far the largest riding in our province. And that is in terms of the number of voters. In terms of size, it is not. It's a nice, compact, high-density area. I had the opportunity to campaign in one of the by-elections near the Premier's riding in Eastern Passage, Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, and was really surprised on a rainy day to find that there are no apartment buildings really in that riding. And I don't know how many in the Premier's riding, but I would guess not many. It's very much single-family. And in my riding, there are 9,000 apartment units, roughly, so condominium and apartments in multi-unit buildings, and about 4,000 homes. So the proportion is quite surprising, and I would think probably pretty unique in the House. Maybe Dartmouth North might have a similar proportion. I'm not sure, but we also have the highest population again. So I wanted to ask the Premier, if I could, Mr. Chair, to begin with, a few questions around the boundary review that's coming, and we're at a 10-year, at the point of a 10-year cycle where we review boundaries and distribution of seats in the House. And it is of concern to me in the riding that I represent, but also I'm interested to know what sort of direction the Premier might be looking at in terms of redistribution of seats or maintaining our current, I guess it's the standard that 25% is above or below the average is the threshold at which we'll accept the differences between individual ridings. And I know right now, again, just because if you take the last 10 years, there's been tremendous growth in my riding, and it's still continuing. And there's another entire subdivision called Mount Royal that's actually has people living there now that have been there almost a year, but it's still underway. Lots of empty lots and new apartments going up. So that is supposed to be about 2,500 more people coming in the riding. And that was the figure given by the developers, 2,500 coming in the riding of Mount Royal, which will ultimately connect directly to Clayton Park West when Regency Park Drive is put through. As you know, we've got an underpass coming now from Bayers Lake under the highway. I understand that's largely funded with our federal infrastructure monies, and that street, when that comes out, will then connect two parts of Regency Park Drive, and we'll have our community more connected. But you know, I'm very conscious of the growth in some of the city ridings and the disparity in the province, and I think it's going to raise some very interesting questions and perhaps difficult questions for MLAs. So, I guess my first thing would be just could the Premier speak about whether he's comfortable with the current disparity in the riding sizes?
Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this is a very good question. I appreciate the members' riding, and of course, when you live in metropolitan Halifax, Dartmouth, you really do get an appreciation for each other's ridings because you're in and out of them all the time. So you know what they look like and the makeup of them by and large, and of course, like many others, I end up out in the industrial park there, or in the I don't even know if they refer to it as an industrial park anymore. Really, it's a business park, and of course I think it's the Keishan Goodman Library that's right there, and I had a campaign event there one time, but I've also, of course, had the opportunity to be in that library a number of times, and they use it very much like a community center. And I think the CBC has been in there at one point in time and did a show from it, and it's just a part of the community that is, I think, appears to me at least, and a member, of course, would know better than I do. It looks to me to be a very well used facility, and certainly it looked to me as that it was providing a great service. They also have there the Thomas Head Riddall room, which is a part of the library complex there, and of course they have the Thomas H. Riddall is it Avenue or Drive there as well, and Thomas Riddall is actually from Hunts Point, just outside of Liverpool. And this is another coincidence. I happen to know that the member, I believe, still has a cottage out toward Hunts Point, if not right in Hunts Point. So she's aware of the legacy of Thomas H. Riddall and some of his wonderful writings. The other thing, and I know this is a little bit of a meander into the question, which I do want to answer. Is that the member's mother is also a tremendous artist, and in my office I am privileged to have one of her paintings, and it's very nice of the member and her mother to give that to me because it's of Milton. It's of the blacksmith shop and the bridge that goes across, or the falls that goes across. I guess the bridge, you just kind of see the corner of it. It's lovely, and I literally have it just behind my desk in my office, and I've certainly had the opportunity to thank her for it before, but it seems that in this forum is another opportunity to express my thanks to her and to her mother. I was trying, as she was asking the question, to remember the process around electoral boundaries reform, because it's not as straightforward as just striking the boundaries committee and sending them off to do their work, because it is now, I think, meant to follow the 2011 census. So I believe they do the work in 2011, and then the Electoral Boundaries Committee is struck the next year. And of course, that would mean that the boundaries would be in place for the next election. The frame, as I recall, there is a resolution of the House. I think there is a resolution of the House that sets out the parameters of the Electoral Boundaries Commission, and I think there is a striking committee of the House that actually strikes the Boundaries Commission. And the whole idea of this was that, of course, the Electoral Boundaries Commission would be independent and therefore not subject to any kind of interference by any one of the parties, and it would be endorsed by the House. I think I'm correct in saying this. I believe that in each case, the recommendations of the Electoral Boundaries Committee have been accepted without amendment. I think that's the history of Electoral Boundaries Committees to date. I don't know if I'm in an unusual position or not, but I have made representations to two Electoral Boundaries Committee, both of which I think were chaired by political scientists over the last last two censuses. And I remember that one of the key points to this was always the question about what the appropriate level of disparity should be between ridings. And this is a question that the House is going to have to consider carefully, because it has very real consequences. 25%, I am not sure is, I mean, we used it last time and we kind of got away with it, but I'm not sure it's a sustainable amount. Like my recollection is that the Supreme Court of Canada has actually ruled on this. I think they used a much smaller number. I can't remember if it was plus or minus 10% or plus or minus 15%, but the idea was that you can now literally have ridings that are twice the size of each other, and that wasn't the theory. The idea was to, to have a deviation from the median, one side or the other. And I know there's a difference between a mean and a median, and I can't recall what it is, but I know there is one. And I deal with the same kind of issues. And I can't remember which are the biggest ones in the province, but I'm sure that Clayton Park would be one of them. I wouldn't be surprised if Timberley was another one of those ones. I think Cole Harbour is one of the larger ones in the province. Bedford's quite large. So where those areas of growth are taking place is where the greatest pressure is in terms of the inequality. It's really a question of this sounds perhaps pejorative. It's not necessarily an inequality in terms of representation. I think legally it's looked at as an inequality of voting power. In other words, the effective power of your vote. If you're in a riding that only has 7,000 people in it, then your vote is twice as powerful as a constituency that has 15,000 votes in it, because and I think the originally this was a charter argument, kind of freedom under the law kind of question. But hand in hand with that question of the size of the ridings is also the question of the makeup of the House, because you can imagine if we struck a resolution here that said there should be 36 members and nobody should deviate more than 15% from the median. Well, you would have ridings that would take up perhaps half of the south end of the province. You would have much larger ridings just in rural Nova Scotia by geography because of the just simply because of the population base. So the other part of the question is, do you look at the House as frozen in time in terms of numbers? Do you say we're not prepared to shrink the number of people in the House? We are not prepared to expand it, because that, of course, is part of the question. Do you so that you don't disproportionately affect things? Do you expand the numbers in the House? And these are all the kinds of questions that that we're going to have to grapple with. I think as the House of Assembly, we're going to be certainly looking forward to hearing what the members of the other parties have to say about this. It's not a decision that we would make without consultation. It's not a decision that we would make without having a thorough discussion on it. I think the disparity in some cases is far too great. I think there are certain fairness questions that you have to address with respect to the size of ridings, but I also understand that has a real tangible effect, and so that's, if you want an indication of kind of that's how I feel about it. But I'm not despite some of the things that have been said, we haven't made up our mind about it. In fact, I can tell you I've spent very, very little time actually thinking about it to any great extent. I did do a lot of thinking about it when the previous Boundaries Review Commission was in